Hello, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, please consider liking the video and subscribing. YouTube uses these metrics in deciding how widely to distribute the videos, so it would be helpful. If you are listening to the audio podcast, you can sign up for updates on the website at simplicityzen.com. Today, my guest is Shozan Jack Haubner. He is a Rinzai Zen monk who was head student at Mount Baldy Zen Center under Kyozan Joshu Sasaki. He is the author of Single White Monk and Zen Confidential, two well-regarded Zen memoirs. If you've not read them, I can highly recommend both, as they are both funny and insightful. Thank you for being here today with us, Shozan.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you're in Austria now, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in Vienna. That's where I live. Yeah.
Oh, great. We'll get to that, how you wound up there. But maybe we can start with where you were born and where you grew up and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm American. I was born in the States. I was born in Milwaukee, right in the Midwest. So I grew up in suburbia, and then my parents moved to farm country. So that's my lineage, farmers and soccer moms.
hmm So was it a pretty white, middle class, normal upbringing, sounds like?
Yeah, definitely. White, middle, lower, slightly upper, depending on where you were. Midwestern. It's a whole culture. Since I've been in Europe, I've started to look at America differently and see each state as its own little self-contained unit with its own culture and its own rules and its own etiquette, much like the countries in Europe.
You know, it's funny you said that. I've often felt like just driving over a border, it feels different. And I've always wondered that, is that just my,
Totally, totally. It feels
you know,
different. It
is that
totally
just
feels
me
different.
mapping? Like, I know that I'm in the new state, so like I'm projecting onto it, but I really feel like it feels like just a different vibe, just the second you cross the border. It's really weird.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. We're hard. There's something in us that is hardwired for borders.
Yeah.
Like here, it's interesting. I'll cross one here. I'll go from Austria to Slovenia, and it's like the roads are different, the buildings are different, the architecture is different, the language is completely different, the color of the signs is different, the shape of the signs is different. So it's really interesting. It's like you've gone through the rabbit hole.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was always bothered by the font on the signs in Oregon. I don't know why. But anyway, that's a digression. Um, so what was it? It was a small communities mostly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
hmm
Yeah, like little, yeah, suburban farm and then farm communities. Yeah, small high school,
hmm
Catholic, raised Catholic, pretty strict Catholic.
hmm So
Yeah.
your family went to Catholic church frequently, it sounds like then?
Yeah, I mean, we were Sunday Mass people, and we were not only Sunday Mass people, we were Latin Mass people. So this was like post Vatican II, obviously. So I believe that the Catholic Church had driven Latin Mass underground. It turned the priest around to face the congregation, got rid of the Latin, and tried to connect, I guess, the congregation with the priest and the services in a more direct way. But in the process, like my mom felt lost something, so she found this like underground Catholic church that was Latin Mass. It was at an old Italian dance hall called Marchesi's that we were pretty convinced was owned by the Milwaukee Mafia.
Mhm.
And like the place would be stinking of beer and wine and cigarettes from Saturday night, but we would pull out the chairs and hold a mass there every Sunday,
Mhm.
Latin mass.
Would you say as a child you were a believer? Did you believe in God?
No,
Did you?
I yeah, I kind of believed in something. I had spiritual drive, but I never like we had those. Were you raised Catholic at all? Christian, Jewish?
I'm baptized Catholic, but I was raised completely atheist. You know, like I didn't even know Christmas had a Christian component until I was like 15. I mean, like
Okay.
that atheist, you know.
You don't remember mass then. I mean, back in the day, I don't know what it is now. But we had these missals where we would follow the mass in these missals, and it's like this is the part where Christ comes down into the wafer. Here now he's going in the blood. I never followed the mass. I never really, I was a kid and I was driven towards God, I guess. So I really tried to pray, and Catholicism was my tool, my vehicle. But, by the time I got into college and I had just a little bit of exposure to different Christian traditions and Nietzsche, for example, very quickly my Catholicism fell away because I realized actually I'm not Catholic. That was a system of beliefs and spiritual techniques that I was using because it was what I was exposed to. And I'm grateful that I got prayer. I think it's great to learn how to pray, or at least be exposed to it from an early age. But very quickly, when I started thinking about it in my college years, it dropped away. And then I entered my desert until I found Zen.
As a kid or even a teenager, when you would pray, would you feel the Holy Spirit? Did you feel some sort of sense of presence or anything?
I don't know. Sometimes. When I was a kid, I really wanted to. When you're a kid and you're Catholic, I know there are going to be people are watching this who are Catholic and they're going to relate to this. Like, you have your miracle phase when you're like in front of the statues and the iconography and you're praying for the Holy Mary to wiggle her toe, or to give you a wink to let you know she's there. Or you're praying for something specific to happen, something bad to go away, or for something good to happen. So you're looking for signs. And I think I was looking more than I was, as you put it, experiencing the Holy Spirit. But I kept doing it. So there was something happening. I had a few moments that I think were very, very spiritual, but not quite what I wanted, which was to be like the Holy Fatima kids and to have a full-blown vision of God or the Virgin Mary or something.
So could you describe these spiritual experiences you had?
I mean, when I was really young, I'm convinced this was, I conjured this one. But when I was very, very, very young, the only place I had any, my parents started this very Catholic school, very small, run by these old sort of strict, single elderly ladies, sometimes men. And the only relief I had from these teachers and my annoying brothers and sisters, who were pretty much my only peers, along with a few other crazy Catholic kids, was in the bathroom. So I remember going in there once and something was bothering me and I was praying really hard. And I thought I saw a vision, a ball of light come down from the window. It was probably literally just cataracts or the sun imprinted on my eyes and me seeing it on the wall. But I remember it was very powerful. And then actually not shortly thereafter, we had this guy, Mr. James, who rented a business in the building, and he came in the bathroom and he saw me and I was kind of flustered. And he said, "Hey man, just relax, like take a few breaths, take some deep breaths." And I did those deep breaths. It was like my first meditation training. It actually relaxed me very much. And then I left the bathroom and got on with my life. So yeah, these are my early experiments with Catholicism and monotheism.
The other spiritual experiences you have, were they similar in nature, or was some sort of visual manifestation, or was there a kind of an inner experience to them as well?
I mean, later on, when I was in high school, I don't know what you would call it. It was very strange. I was driving along the freeway, and I've actually talked about this before, so I apologize for being redundant. But driving along the freeway, I was like a junior in high school, and it was one of those, like, we were just getting ready for summer vacation, and I'd come from a party, and we'd had a dance in the gazebo at this girl's house, and I danced with somebody who's popular, so I was feeling good. It was kind of in that zone, driving down the freeway, and there was this outdoor theater, I remember, to my right, and something shifted out of nowhere, and I don't know what it was, but it changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of came back from this experience, and I had this flush. It was like a sort of just an insight, and then like the bottom dropped out of this insight. It was very deep. There's nothing bad about it. It wasn't negative. It was purely I don't know what you would call it, an opening is what I would call it. And when I came back from it, I had this feeling, and it became an insight. And the insight was, which I've come to learn is very common with people, especially in the West, they have this insight at some point. There is something. Mm-hmm. There is something rather than nothing. I'm here, even if it's an illusion, I'm in the matrix, or, there's no God, or there is a God, but I'm studying the wrong, whatever the case, there is something rather than nothing. And to me, like that's, at the time I thought that this is the like foundation of my belief system, my spiritual search, or that fact that this allows me to be a nihilist, basically.
Mm-hmm. Did you, at the time, I guess you were still a Catholic,
I wasn't necessarily Catholic. Like I said, I just kind of used the apparatus that I was given. I don't think but I could be reimagining
that. Did you filter it? Did your understanding of it come through that Christian filter, or was it totally unrelated in your experience?
Oh, totally unrelated. Yeah, totally unrelated. Totally unrelated. Like, I wasn't a good Catholic, so I would just show up at Mass, and I would try to pray, but I wouldn't even be paying any attention to the Mass. So when I had this experience, then I became less and less, almost very uninterested in the Catholic Mass. And that's when I started writing. I wanted to put that experience into words. So I started writing, basically a book of philosophy is what it turned out to be. Mm-hmm. And I realized I wasn't getting my point across through that. So I started writing poetry, then short stories. I just started writing.
Mm-hmm. What were your high school years, teenage years like? Were you a partier? Were you nerdy, philosophical, serious, goofy, partying,
Kind of lame and anxious, pretending to be a student athlete because that's what was garnered attention in my school. My school was a very Protestant, expensive, conservative, upper class, status driven college prep school. So I was fortunate, to be able to go there in the sense that they really drilled like good study habits, but it was pretty much kind of like a snooty, privileged atmosphere. Although I had some really good friends, I have to say that. So I was just kind of a nerd, just trying to figure life out, writing a little bit, playing basketball, obsessed with basketball. I have my obsessions in life. Much of high school it was basketball until I started writing around my sophomore, junior year.
I think you're around my age. I'm 49. How old are you?
Oh, 49. Why are we talking about age? Edit that out.
So you just said you were 30 anyway. So would you and the reason I asked, because I think I was talking to Corey House, who's around my age too, and I realized in retrospect, Star Wars was a huge part of my childhood, and I can't help but think the whole Jedi thing and the Force and something binding influenced my ultimate and then I had saw the Grateful Dead and kind of experienced those things, and I feel like that all confluenced together kind of led me to Zen. I'd be curious, you being of a similar generation, if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think Star Wars is sort of a cliche, and especially now when I talk to my girlfriend's son, who's 17 now, 0.000 interest in Star Wars. I think it's become so commodified. It's such a grotesque, like, I don't know, it's part of the mythical commercial industrial complex now that it's unrecognizable in the form that we got it in, which was this weird, semi-expensive, but mostly outlier movie by this hippie, bizarro director who'd only done, I think, a couple other films before that. They were very strange, So, and it hit me with like right in the gut when I saw it. I think you're right. I think that movie informed, a lot of my ethics, a lot of my spiritual worldview, my sense of the hero. When I went to Hollywood many years later, I became obsessed with Joseph Campbell, whom George Lucas was somewhat obsessed with, and learned all about the hero's journey. And I think that sort of heroic model, that template, was really pressed upon me by that movie. A lot of people in my generation, but it doesn't connect with kids anymore the same way. Yeah. And the generation before us, I think they had Harry Potter. I think that really hit with that generation. I don't know what this generation has. Mr. Beast, maybe, on YouTube.
Well, I mean, my kids are 9 and 11, and they're obsessed with Harry Potter. It's still going strong.
Oh, interesting. Okay, it's going strong, yeah. But any interest in Star Wars?
You know, the humor.
Yeah. It's like probably was like Flash Gordon was to us, you know, like not so much.
Yeah. So you went to college, I assume, right?
Yeah.
What did you major in?
I studied philosophy. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I thought if I study English, it's going to kill my writing. And there was no creative writing program there. I wanted to study philosophy, get some big ideas, and then write about them or from them.
Mm-hmm. So being a writer was an early passion for you.
Yeah.
Was it mostly Western philosophy, or did you dabble or get exposed to any Eastern philosophy at all?
It was all Western philosophy. It was a Catholic school, so it was the pre-Socratics, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Then we moved through the medieval philosophers and sort of climaxed with Thomas Aquinas, who was kind of in the school in the political department, the history department, the philosophy department, the English department, Thomas Aquinas. We would go through the European Enlightenment and then kind of taper off at the existentialists. We never actually got to the postmodernists. So that's what I did my senior thesis on, was the postmodernists, because I wanted to learn about them. And I kind of ran the whole gamut from the pre-Socratics to the postmodernists, and then realized there was no food for living here, nowhere. And the philosophical project itself seemed desiccated to me. I mean, that might have been because I closed up postmodernists, who were pretty dry and pretty cynical.
Right.
But
were you exposed to any mystics like Meister Eckhart or anything like that?
Not then. No, there was no mystics. It was really kind of this intellectual, great books program, Catholic philosophy. So we didn't get to the mystics. I think there was Teresa of Avila at one point, but I didn't really connect with anything. We might have read the mystics, but by that point, I was drifting hardcore away from Catholicism and beginning to kind of rebel against the whole idea of monotheism, because I was pretty Nietzsche drunk for my first 2-3 years of college.
Mm-hmm. What did you do after school?
I went to Hollywood and I tried to write screenplays and successfully wrote them, but never got any produced. And I worked as a runner in Hollywood, where you're running around. At one point, without my knowledge, had to buy drugs for my boss. I thought I was buying a can of film from somebody, and then I slammed on the brakes in traffic, and the film can hit the front of my car, and it spilled open. There were cocaine in this film reel box. Then for a while, I was a story editor and a writer, so I'd get 3 or 4 scripts a day, and I'd have to speed read them, give an analysis, and then give a commentary and recommend or get rid of it. So it was about 8-9 years I spent in Hollywood. I did a bunch of odd jobs during those 8 or 9 years. I mean, I was working in a computer school for a while, in a bookstore, many offices, just kind of kicking around until I met my Zen. Well, then I found that, Diamond Way Buddhism, followed by Shambhala, and then topped off with Zen when I met my mentor in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. And so did any well-known scripts get filtered through you and get made in the movie?
Oh yeah, I was there at the end. No, I didn't get credit for it, but I was there.
We can credit you the fact that it got through your filter, that it got made.
Not so much. I can tell you, I passed on some amazing scripts. I was reading for Ridley Scott, the director, for a while, and his team had told me, you need to be a strong filter, so don't let anything through, because Ridley doesn't want to waste his time. So I was like, I'm not going to let anything through. So one year I read Gosford Park and then A Beautiful Mind, And I passed on both of them for Ridley for directing projects. And then that year, they both went on to win the Academy Awards for Best Screenplay and Best Adapted Screenplay. So I can only take credit for stuff that slipped through my fingers.
There you go. So you mentioned the Diamond Buddhism, or what was it called?
Diamond Way.
Diamond Way. So that was your first introduction to Buddhism?
Yeah, pretty much. Other than Alan Watts and Joseph Campbell, that was my first practicing Buddhist experience.
So prior to the Diamond Way, and when you were reading Alan Watts, did you actually sit, or did you?
No,
no, you're just reading.
Alan Watts doesn't. Yeah, Alan Watts. You must know this. I mean, I'm sure you've discovered Alan Watts. Like he doesn't talk about practice. He just sits there and he never mentions practice. That's the one like fatal flaw, Achilles heel of that man, is that he never encourages people to hit the cushion. But his thought process, how he untangles the thought process, is beautiful. I mean, he is the greatest gateway drug to Eastern practices that one could hope for.
So the Diamond Way, how did you discover that? Were you looking for a spiritual path?
Yeah, I just Googled Buddhism, and they were the first people that came up, Buddhism Los Angeles. So I showed up, and it was at this German woman's house in this gated community. It's kind of a weird little community, slightly cultish, and they remain so. I mean, but it was a really good introduction to Buddhism, and the people were really sincere. And I had like my first exposure to like codependent origination, Enki, no self, and that was it. Once you get that taste.
Why did you Google Buddhism?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, in retrospect, I think because I was reading Joseph Campbell, and I was like, this sounds right. This really sounds right. Whatever is going on with these people sounds true. And it was like there was no going back to anything I'd learned in the Western tradition. It was just dead earth behind me. So this had flowers on it, and water, and a little hut. It was very alive.
You know, so I've conducted a number of these interviews now, and of course talked to lots of Zen friends over the years, and it always just seems that everyone kind of has, whether they articulate it this way or not, everybody kind of has a great doubt that drives them to the practice. Some people, they're just, I'm unhappy and I want to be happy. You know, some people are like, what's the truth? What's going on? I want to know. Or some people is like, I'm afraid to die. Can I resolve that? You know, if you had a great doubt, how would you, like, what category would you put it in, or would it be in multiple categories?
I think a great doubt would be this despair, really, like despair. And under that umbrella, there's fear of death, loneliness, the total meaninglessness of this life, and like it's probably semi-suicidal, although I've never been suicidal really. But there is that impulse to just, what the hell does this all come down to? What is the point? So it's that drive, and then the flip side of that is a kind of curiosity and despair are my driving motivators for entering the stream.
And so when you went to the Diamond Way, did they start you meditating?
Yeah, well, I don't remember what we did. We did a lot of like chakra stuff. I remember that. So you're focusing on the different chakras, the throat chakra, all the different chakras. And you're imagining different colored lights coming out of these chakras. That is my memory of what we did with them. It was hanging out with some people afterwards that I got exposed to like basic Buddhist teachings. Because I don't remember getting those when we did this kind of slightly woo-woo chakra stuff.
Have you ever seen the sitcom Community?
Yeah, I saw a couple episodes.
Oh. There's one character, Pierce, and he's part of this Buddhist cult, and he always talks about the laser Buddha. It made me think of that a little bit. But well, he's like an 8th level laser Buddha or something. But
right.
So So you kind of discovered more vanilla Buddhism through informally through some friends. What was your kind of next Buddhist steps after that?
Well, then I oh well I yeah I won't get into why I left the Diamond Way people, except to say that it was time. But I
Hmm.
discovered Shambhala then. So I found
Okay.
a couple got Shambhala Center in Los Angeles, and I'm very
Hmm.
grateful to those people. This was kind of like in the heyday of Shambhala, I think. It was prior to their current situation, which is sort of scandal plagued. But it was
Was
just two
Trungpa still
guys.
alive or?
No, he wasn't alive. He was
Yeah.
gone by then. This is 90s, late 90s.
Hmm.
Um, just a couple of guys in Los Angeles teaching this beginners classes on Buddhism. Uh,
Hmm.
one of them was a film composer. The other one was, I don't know what he did, but they were like Tweedledee and Tweedledum or Abbott and Costello or Dumb and Dumber or whatever. They were like a comedy duo
Hmm.
and very sincere. And they got up there and they taught us Buddhism, and they taught us how to incorporate Buddhism into our lives. And they did that amazing thing that the Shambhala people do it, and some of the Vipassana teachers do it, like Goldstein
Hmm.
and Sharon Salzberg. They were able to take these ancient teachings and do that translation trick where it comes out into modern contemporary life and is completely relevant. These two guys
Hmm.
were able to do that.
Hmm.
Um, then I got sick of them after about 2 years. And I don't remember why. I remember I was I went to a retreat, and there was this sort of ornery teacher, and she made us sit the whole time. She didn't give very good teachings. I remember sitting, and it was torture. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit meditation. And I remember looking at the altar, and there were all kinds of brightly colored flags, and there was all kinds of gear, and there were framed pictures, and there was incense, and I
Hmm.
remember thinking, this is too busy. I'm out. And shortly thereafter, I found a little postcard in a coffee shop that said, Zen, it's not what you think. Come to this such and such place on such and such date, and I'll teach you Zen. So I went, and that's when I found my teacher, my mentor, who kind of introduced me to Zen Buddhism.
So were you not during those 2 years? Were you not sitting that much?
We sat once in the beginning and once at the end, but mostly there were classes.
Hmm.
Yeah,
How
in the
about
Shambhala group.
how about just hanging out at your house or apartment? Did you have a daily sitting practice or anything like that?
I did, but I didn't really call it that. It was more like what I called sacred time. So I had this rent-controlled apartment with a big closet, and
Mhm.
I put a chair in there, and I would go in there. It was like sacred
Mhm.
time. So when I went in there, sat in this chair, it was time to drop all my ambitions and fears and horniness and money concerns and Los Angeles, sorrows, and just sit and just be a human. So it was a form of meditation. I would usually just sit there and breathe and do a version of mindfulness that I'd learned with the Shambhala group, which is thought arises, there it is. I'm going to look at
Mhm.
it now. I'm not just going to let it run free in my noodle. So I did that to, varying degrees of consistency and commitment.
Mhm. That sounds not too dissimilar to the way some people interpret shikantaza and practice it in the Soto Zen.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
Um, so you found the Zen group. Could you talk about your first impressions of that once you showed up?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite a group. It was just this guy, white guy from Jersey, about 10 years older than me, in like these really like worn out robes
Hmm.
in a parking garage community room. So it was like a concrete room where they had like AA meetings, and I think
Hmm.
some drug abuse happened there at night. So it was kind of a funky room with a funky smell and a funky vibe.
Hmm.
But this Zen teacher had laid out zabutans, the big square black cushions, and then put zafus on top of them, the round circular cushions, very symmetrically. And he had just a glass vase with a single rose in it, incense. And he brought something to the space, and there was something to his presence as well. Like I realized I had stepped into a different game when I entered that room for the first time. Like, I don't know if this is karma or my imagination or what, but I thought, okay, here's a guy who's living it. And it was very different than the other experiences I had, which were very sincere lay practitioners. Like, this was a guy who was carrying the wisdom inside of him, instead of having had brushes with it, which is how I felt with the other teachers I had had.
You know, it's fascinating to me how many people get hooked by Zen, not so much by the ideas of it, you know, the philosophy of it or anything, but by the living presence of someone they meet, in the way that they carry themselves and the vibes that they have. I mean, it's you know, almost you know, it's almost universal that's what hooks people into Zen. You know, it's you know, just feeling someone's presence, and they're like, oh, I want what that guy has, or I want what she has.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I actually never thought about it just like that before. I never actually put it in those terms before, but you're totally right. And that is what the practice is designed to do. It's connect you to your surroundings, including the people who show up on your doorstep desperately needing something.
And this, your mentor, were they ordained?
Yeah, he was a priest in the lineage. So he had spent 10 years at Mount Baldy, the monastery that I ultimately went to. And now he was down in Los Angeles at the temple that we have there, kind of feeling around for his next move in life. So you would spend 10 years at the monastery training, go through the training system from scholarship student to unsui, or beginning chicken monk. Then you would go through the officer positions like Zendo officer, then cooking in the kitchen, then the Sutra Hall officer, then finally become the head monk. And then after that, it's like, what are you still doing here? Like, suddenly our teacher would start giving you an attitude, like, why are you still here? You know, and then, all right, I got to make you a priest so you can go teach the Dharma, get out of my hair. And so that was his stage when I met him. He was a priest, and he was out kind of leading a sitting group and teaching Buddhism right in the heart of Hollywood. And it was a nice thing to be sitting with this very traditionally robed and monk in the middle of this crazy city. The smell of marijuana was always wafting into the room because people were getting high in this underground parking structure. And it was lots of noise and horns and sounds of people laughing. And we were in there meditating, the heart of it. So it had a very, very nice feel.
Was this a weekly thing or a daily thing? How often would you guys meet?
I think it was twice a week, maybe, but we became friends. So then we would go get margaritas, and that's when I really got into it and got to really plumb his depths and feel his insight and experience it and push up against him and beat up against him and poke it and find the holes and see how elastic it was. And that changes you. So that was wonderful to be able to do that. That's when you really learn as a Zen practitioner.
It's been a couple of years since I've read your books, but I kind of remember something that when you saw him drunk and he was kind of still the same guy, like that really spoke to you. Or am I remembering this right?
Yeah, but probably. I mean, I was really naive and I was very dualistic. So I kind of thought I wasn't, but the spiritual traditions that I had been heavily exposed to taught that there's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong. And he was able to go out and it would change his personality, but he was still manifesting Zen. That was the feeling that I got. He never lost that sort of clarity. And playfulness and seriousness.
Back to the presence issue that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I never lost that presence. It just became drunken presence, which is, nice to see.
Were you sitting daily at this point?
I still wasn't. No.
Yeah. Did you when you did sit, was it breath counting or following the breath? What kind of practices did he have you do?
I only sat with him. I only sat when I sat with him. So it was still, I was very much in my head with my practice. so I endured the sitting,
Mhm.
but mostly I just kind of liked hanging out with him and having fun afterwards and asking him questions.
Mhm.
It wasn't until we really started going deep into Zen and I realized that it ain't, the problem ain't up here.
Mhm.
Something is going on. I have to open up my whole being.
Mhm.
Something's going to have to shift on a different level in order for me to understand this. And
Mhm.
for that to happen, I have to practice. And
Mhm.
then shortly thereafter, but that was it. I just thought that. Then shortly thereafter, I was in the office at the temple where he was living
Mhm.
out in West Adams in Los Angeles. And someone was in there and they were talking about how there's an upcoming, excuse me, upcoming retreat.
Mhm.
And there's still some spaces available. And like in that moment, I knew I was gonna go to that retreat and then I was gonna move to the monastery and my mentor was gonna move out of the temple he was living at and move into my rent controlled apartment. And I knew I was gonna stay at the monastery for at least 3 years. Like I knew all those things were gonna happen.
Mhm.
And 5 minutes earlier, I didn't even know what I was gonna have for dinner, much less that I was gonna become a Zen Buddhist monk. But that's what happened. Yeah, instead of 3 years, I stayed 13 years.
And did he move into your apartment?
Yeah, I did.
Have you guys maintained friendship through the years?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He's not exactly sure where he's at right now, but yeah, he's moving around, but we're still very tight.
So you went to the session. Could you describe that experience at all?
Yeah, it was a living hell.
Mhm.
And no, it wasn't a living hell. It was amazing. It was amazing, actually,
Mhm.
now that I think back on it. Yeah, you know how it is. I mean, you're a Zen practitioner, correct?
Mhm.
And are you in the Rinzai tradition or is it Soto or both or
Kind of Soto and then White Plum, which is, Soto with koans.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you
And
know,
I've been to Rinzai Monastery, so I know what the vibe is like.
yeah, they're all kind of all these Zen retreats are more or less the same, to varying degrees of yeah, uh, whatever. But yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was so hard, and that because I hadn't sat, like I just didn't really like to sit. And now we woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. We had 10 minutes to throw on our robes,
Mhm.
pee, and go to the Zendo. And the
Mhm.
second you entered the Zendo, you were no longer in control of your body or mind. You had to
Mhm.
surrender it to the form. And that was like the first big lesson. You are not the star of the show anymore. You're not behind the wheel. The little homunculus has had like a chloroform rag put over his face in the back of your head. He's unconscious. Now you're being guided by the form, and you have to surrender to the body of practitioners. And that was amazing. So, but it was hard. And of course, the ego and the mind keeps exploding volcanically to the surface. And it was physically difficult and mentally difficult. I was sitting next to another brand new student, and he was, driving me crazy, making noises the whole retreat. And my knees were killing, my lower back was killing. I had to pee all the time. I was having prostate issues. It was my
Mhm.
sciatica. You kept getting yelled at by the meditation instructors to sit still, and very difficult and uh, and totally transformative.
I
Best
remember,
drug I ever did.
yeah, I remember at one point in the '90s, I considered going to a session there. And I remember I got the schedule, and my memory is that there were 50-minute sitting periods. Am I remembering that right? I mean, it was.
No, I mean, I don't know of that. We get up, like I said, okay, so you enter the Zendo by 3 o'clock. It was 3 o'clock, wake up by 3:10, you're in the Zendo.
Mhm.
Then you had basically the whole day was mostly sitting meditation. Now the sitting meditation was broken up with walking kinhin or rest kinhin. Rest kinhin, you stayed in the Zendo, you got to change the cross of your feet, but you couldn't really move. And then walking kinhin was like I think it was a 10-minute walking meditation. during that time you could pee. So 25 minutes sitting meditation, then a kinhin, walking or sitting kinhin. That was, and then 4 koan practices, which the whole koan practice, those four koan practices a day. So Roshi would meet with every student, monk, nun, everybody at the retreat 4 times a day for koan practice. Then we had 3 formal meals, and we had chanting twice a day and 1 public talk from Roshi. And that was it. That was the day.
Was this sesshin your first introduction to Sasaki? Had you met him before?
No, I had seen him at the LA temple giving giving teishos, Dharma lectures. But yeah, I did, I forgot what we called it. I formally became his student. I gave him incense. And then I wound up, like 4 o'clock in the morning, stumbling into his room for my first private koan meeting. Yeah, that retreat.
Well, what was your first impression of him?
I mean, there's so much preamble to when you finally meet him. Students are singing his praises, and my mentor had given me a lot of teachings before that Tathagata Zen, which is what my teacher Sasaki Roshi taught, which is a very specific style of Zen that he his own sort of style of teaching and take on Buddhist tradition. So I had a lot of preamble. So I don't, my feeling, it was very spectacular, very gnomic, he was almost like a mythical creature. But I was tired, and I was also a bit cynical about, I was kind of, keeping my cool a little bit, and not wanting to be one of these sort of sycophantic students, always keeping my, antenna up. So I gradually kind of developed a dynamic or a relationship with him. It's funny, I don't remember what my first impression of him was. It's probably in one of my books somewhere, but.
Yeah. What, could you describe the Tathagata Zen and how that would differ from more normative?
Yeah, okay. I mean, so my teacher talked about how he had these, when I met him, he had these they were kind of very, by the time that I had met him, he was 100 years old, and he'd been teaching this, he'd been studying and practicing Buddhism full-time since he was 14. So by the time I met him, his teaching has become very sort of like dry and distilled, I would say. So he talked about how the Dharmakaya, however you want to put it, the Buddha nature is 1. Everything's 1. He called it 0, right? So 0. 0 has no qualities whatsoever. So you could call it God, but you can't objectify it. So we'll say it's 0. But 0 breaks apart, right, into 2 fundamental opposing but complementary opposites. We could call this yin and yang, maybe. He never used those terms, but plus, minus, left,
Relative.
right, up, down. Sorry?
Absolute relative?
Maybe not.
Dualism in general.
Well, yeah, this and that, me and you. Like, it's the first thing, right? It's the first, like, it's like, so 0 is you're totally dissolved. You're not thinking, gone. But then thinking arises. And when thinking arises, there's always 2, if this, then that, we hear about in the Diamond Sutra, right? Yeah. Is it the Diamond Sutra? So that was his teaching. So basically his practice, so then the practice was you dissolve completely into the activity that you're doing. Whether it's sitting and breathing or sweeping or doing the dishes. And if you're not thinking about yourself or anything, you're dissolved into it. You become 1 with the activity. But then the thinking mind arises, and then your job is to give it away again. So he had a very sort of philosophical approach, and it kind of came out of his Kyoto school, because he had studied with those Kyoto school philosophers in Kyoto when he was a monk.
Mm-hmm.
And then he specifically showed you how to practice it. Like giving is what he called, or making relationship, dissolving into relationship with your surroundings, the things that the people and things that you're in relationship with, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Did he give you Mu? Because I know he has a little bit of an idiosyncratic koan curriculum, but did you start with Mu or Who Am I or any sort of breakthrough koan?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been talking to my mentor about this, because he's now studying with Harada Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I sort of stumbled a little bit when we were talking about Tathagata Zen is because I started thinking parallelly while I was talking about my mentor, who is now studying with Harada Roshi and is doing a very traditional style koan practice. So he's doing Mu with Harada Roshi. And Harada Roshi is teaching him in a different way than Sasaki Roshi taught. Mm-hmm. And so my mentor is having a sort of a different practice experience now than he had with Sasaki Roshi. So Sasaki Roshi, he gave the Mu koan, but the way my mentor describes koan practice with Harada is very different than what Sasaki Roshi did. Sasaki Roshi was really unconventional. And my mentor is finding parallels with Harada Roshi and Sasaki Roshi, but Harada Roshi he describes as like Sasaki, like the cooler younger brother who kind of explains things. Sasaki Roshi was old school, even to the oldest of the old schoolers in Japan. This guy was old school, and he didn't tell you if you were doing something. In my experience, he never told me if I was doing something right or wrong necessarily. He didn't put stones out on the footpath, leave any breadcrumbs for me. He was very difficult in that way, very kind of severe, incredibly open, warm, and loving, but he was very severe. So it wasn't necessarily a traditional koan practice. Like he had his style for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you first conceived of moving there, were you aware of his reputation as a womanizer or so forth? Was that part of the ethos already?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had talked. Oh, yeah, because my mentor had never imagined that I would become a monk, even a Zen student. We were just friends, and he wanted to be a friend, and that's what we were. And so he openly talked with me about it. So, as much as he knew, I knew. But it's funny when you talk about situations like this and what you know. I mean, sometimes you know what you heard. Sometimes you heard something and it was, corroborated. I mean, in communities like that, when there's stuff happening behind the scenes, it's the truth. It becomes very fuzzy. It becomes very amorphous. I wrote about this in my book. It's like a daemon, like it's this spirit behind the scenes that keeps shape shifting, and until it finally comes out. And I learned in the end, you need to talk about what he like. It became real for me when I finally heard what Roshi did physically with his hands, with his body to the woman. That's when it becomes real. There's no interpreting that. There's no. It is what it is. It's a physical fact. Actually, you can interpret it however you want, but the fact is the fact. So when I met my mentor, it wasn't. He talked to me openly about what he knew, but thinking back and being honest with myself, I didn't really know what to think or really have a clear picture of what was going on.
Was it presented as kind of like crazy wisdom, or was it talked about in the context of abuse, or how did people conceptualize it?
Neither of those things. People were. I mean, it was very much like in the background and sometimes in the foreground. I mean, like I said, I met Roshi when he was over 100, so he was not like in his peak virility. But I would talk about it openly, and I would test monks and nuns and priests when I was an early student to see if they would try and cover it up or speak ignorantly or blame the women or say something stupid about it, because in a lot of ways I was looking for a fight, and I didn't want to be duped by cultish behavior. So, and usually I got pretty good responses from people. Mostly I think some people were struggling with it. Some people were acknowledging the fact that Roshi was a great teacher, but he had these great flaws. Some people would say, oh, it's a teaching. I didn't tend to talk to those people too much. There was like a certain kind of crazy that I didn't want to interact with on this issue, but like a wide variety of responses to it.
And and I imagine by the time you got there, there'd already been a couple of cycles of people who gotten disillusioned and left, or people who accepted it and stayed. I mean, I imagine that had kind of cycled through a couple times too, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And did you ever talk to Sasaki about it yourself?
It's funny. I was just thinking about this today. I mean, yeah. It would have been interesting to talk to him directly, but I wouldn't have gotten. I had to make peace with it. It wasn't his job to settle my mind on this issue. But one time, so when I became head monk, I was working with a nun who was aware of the fact that he was still having like sexual activity of some kind with women in koan practice. That was her understanding or belief. So, and I was the head monk. So now it was like, okay, this is happening on my watch. And no one had complained to me or ever brought it up. And in fact, I had tried to sort of bring it up to some students, as I recall, and kind of was told to mind my own business. So at one point, there was a Q&A after a talk that my teacher had given, and I asked him, some students say that sexual activity in koan practice is teaching. Some students say it's compulsive, ego activity. What are your thoughts on this? Or what do you think? It was interesting, his response. As I recall, he said something like, who are these people who say this? If they think this, they should come before me directly and we can have a conversation. But I can't address concerns, that you're bringing to me secondhand. I was like, all right, touche, fair enough. And I didn't actually then confront him myself. Yeah. So, and there may have been a few other times. I mean, I remember after the whole scandal broke, I brought him the computer and said, this is what's going on. This is after he had been sick, and actually brought him, the first article that kind of said this misbehavior has been happening for years and years and years, that set off the whole scandal, and brought it to him. And we talked about it at the time. And it was an interesting process. I don't have any, I don't know what his motivations were. I don't know why he touched women sexually. I don't have any answers for it. I don't know why teachers do these things. Some people say that, there's a difference between emotional maturity and spiritual wisdom. And I don't know. The jury's still out for me on what that was all about. There's no way I can throw this guy out. He was a Zen master of different type of human being, and I honor him to my core. And I think that when he misbehaved, however you want to call it, sexual misconduct, in some cases. In other cases, it was enlightening for certain female students. So we ran into trouble when we tried to address the misconduct, because these students, female students who had really gotten something out of that activity, were like, don't speak for me. So the whole gamut of experience. In the end, I've just had to kind of take it and hold it and move forward with my life. But the experience of dealing with that has never left me. It's still a koan for me.
So by the time you'd become head monk, and you had a couple years of practice under your belt, I was curious, what was bringing you back to Zen? Like what in what way was it changing you that you thought, like, okay, this is time well spent, I'm going to keep doing this? Like what was your inner experience as a quote unquote mature you know Zen practitioner at that point? Like what was Zen doing for you in your life?
It was, so you mean like at the monastery? Because yeah, that was my most of my
Just,
training.
you as a person being a longtime Zen practitioner, there's always a point where it seems like there's a threshold where people do it for a couple years and they either think like, oh, well, this is worth it, I'm gonna keep doing it, or they just disappear. And I'm always curious, the
Yeah.
people who stick with it, I have my own reasons, but I'd like to hear other people's. Like, what was it about Zen that kept you coming back? Like, what was your inner experience that made you want to continue this?
So let's talk about like post-monastery, because that's monastery is a different thing. But post-monastery, I find myself coming back again and again and again to the practice, because without it, it's just human world stuff, and that it's always dualistic, and I'm always trapped in that framework. Good, bad, success, failure, healthy, unhealthy. And when I come back to my practice, it reminds me of what it's all about again. And it just resets me, makes me plumb and calm and focused. And there's nothing else that does that. Zen is, I still go to Shambhala, books and lectures online for teachings and Vipassana teachings and mindfulness teachings, but Zen is my practice. And ultimately the Zen teachings, they're the cleanest and they're the clearest and they're the most devoid of scriptural or dogmatic baggage, and built into the teachings is this clean, crisp clarity. And my teacher said Zen has few moving parts, and it does. I've been able to take it with me into different situations and different lives and different phases of my life. And it always reminds me of what's important. It puts life back in perspective, and it just gives me something outside of, because if I stick on my own for too long, that despair comes back, that anxiety dialed up to the point of despair is what I experience. And without doing my practice, that's and manifesting it, I go back to that despair sooner or later. And I become an icky person too.
Say that again, sorry?
I become an ickier person too, more gross and bullying and nasty when I don't practice.
How long did you stay as head student after Sasaki passed away? And he passed away at 107, 108?
Yeah,
right?
He was in his 108th year. They say in Japanese he's walking his 108th year. I wasn't ever his head student. I was head monk for a while at the monastery.
Okay, that's right, head monk. Yeah, sorry.
That's a position that you rotate through. So, I was his shika. He was like manager. Head monk is probably a bit too hoity-toity of a phrase. You're managing retreats. You're running the center basically. And as he aged, there were fewer new monks. So it was like 5 years I was his shika, which had to be about the longest time anybody was shika. because he was just old and he was phasing out. He was leaving this life form. He was checking out, but it took a while. He had a lot of life in him, and a lot of karma and a lot of momentum. So I was like 5 years. I was his head monk.
And did you continue that position after he passed away, or did you leave pretty much right away?
Well, I mean, his passing away coincided with like this neutron bomb of the scandal going off in our community, which in turn all these old issues that we had around spiritual authority and old gripes and grudges kind of erupted to the surface, and the community was in a state of disarray. But we were a Rinzai Zen community led by a Roshi, and that means our practice centered on koan practice, zazen, and the teachings that my teacher gave, the teishos. So when he was gone and he didn't name a successor, we had no plan, So suddenly he was dead, and it was clear that he had no successor. I think all of us kind of thought he's going to give us some kind of plan. He's the, teacher, but he didn't. So the community kind of fell apart and is still stumbling along because they don't have koan practice. They don't have teishos or the formal Dharma lectures by a Zen master. So I was a version of a head monk at his temple in Los Angeles, and stayed there for 3 years. And basically I feel like I just had one continual meeting during that time with my Sangha members, with my fellow priests, with the monks and nuns I was on staff with. We were all trying to figure out what to do. Finally, my answer was write about all this and move on with my life.
I'm curious, did he ever address why he didn't give anyone Inca Dharma transmission, or is there speculation why? Or
dude, I mean, again, that I would lose a lot of good years trying to speculate as to why Roshi did what he did or didn't do what he didn't do. Presumably, nobody manifested zero, death and resurrection in their practice the way that he thought it should be done. Now, there was speculation that there were 2 monks from Japan that came over here that he had primed to be successors, and both of them tragically died. One of them of cancer and one of them something else. So that's possible, but I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not sure why, but I remember we after he died, we did a whirlwind tour of Rinzai Zen temples in Japan. And I remember we were having dinner with a Roshi, really great guy, Minakawa Roshi. And I remember him saying, it's a shame that Sasaki Roshi didn't come up with some kind of succession plan, because he had a lot of really sincere students and he had a lot going. So it's a shame he didn't come up with anything. At the time, I thought, well, we're still going strong, dude. We're practicing, we're teaching each other. But he was right. A Rinzai Zen community, the way that we were nurtured, raised, and grown, we kind of needed koan practice and a Zen master.
So did you start writing your book while you're still at the temple, or is that something you started after you left?
I wrote one when I was there, Zen Confidential, and then, actually both of them. Then I wrote Single White Monk when I was there too.
And did you shop those around, or did somebody come to you and ask you to write them?
I got Shambhala just contacted me because I published some essays in the Buddhist magazines, and they asked if I wanted to write a book, and I said, I'll just keep writing these essays and then we can throw them together in a book. And they said, okay. So that's what I did for 2 books.
Cool. And great, as I said in the introduction, great books. I definitely recommend anyone. They're funny and poignant, and insightful too. Not to make you blush, but I definitely
Thank you.
recommend people read them.
Don't blush, I'm eating it up.
Yeah. So what was your life like after you left the temple? What'd you do?
It was I was fairly broken in a lot of ways, but I'd also broken free. So it was really good. I mean, the final years of dealing with my teacher's death and the scandal, it was hard. It was really hard. And there were a lot of demons that came out in our community. A lot of psychic energy was released. And I don't believe in these kinds of things. I'm very careful of not to go woo-woo, but there was something going on and it was powerful and people were going crazy. And I was going crazy. And I think it was like almost like detoxing from my spiritual infatuation with my teacher and having to distill the essence of what he taught me so I could take it with me when I left the monastery. And I was also involved in an extremely difficult dynamic, like epically difficult dynamic with a couple people, mostly one person that I had also been intimately involved with at one point. So that was kind of coming to a head. So I finally wrote about this shit and broke free from the monastery. And I mean, it was total freedom. And like, it was a kind of euphoria. I mean, I always say that the two best things that ever happened to me were finding and going to the monastery and then leaving the monastery, and not necessarily in that order. But it was a combination of like sadness and total bliss when I left the monastery. And I mean, I got a little bit funky. I went to Peru and I did an ayahuasca retreat with a shaman in the Amazon for a week.
How was that?
It was amazing and intense. I mean, it's not my primary thing. I did a few more ayahuasca journeys, but yeah, it was amazing. It was exactly what I needed. Post-Zen. I thought about doing more sitting meditation retreats, but I thought, how much more do you need? You've been doing these for 13 years. You've been, try something new. And so I did. And that traveled around. I came to Europe. I met my girlfriend. And yeah, now I'm living here and I've been with her ever since. That was 5 years ago.
How did you support yourself after you left the monastery? Just odd jobs?
I mean, this and that. I've been in the gig industry, I've been gigging and a little bit of writing, and I've got a Patreon page now, which I should plug, so that my Patreons help out with that. So yeah, I mean, I've been lucky, but it's always like, oh boy, where's that next check gonna come from?
Yeah. Do you have a Zen group there in Austria, Vienna?
Yeah, I've got a friend out here who's a priest, and he's got a group. So I sit with them. Yeah, it's a great group out here in Vienna. European practice is a bit different than American practice. I mean, Austria is a Catholic country, and it's still in the blood, I think. So very sincere practitioners, like less rebellious than American students. I think when American students, a lot of time when they come to Zen, they've got like this John Cage beat poet, Ginsberg type influence, and it's very individualistic, idiosyncratic type of vibe. But European practitioners, at least a lot of the ones that I've met here, they have more of a kind of a traditional, sincere, most Catholic vibe when they come to the practice. So less crazy here is what I'm trying to say.
Have you ever been tempted to work with another teacher and kind of complete your training or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm still in touch with my mentor, and I'm very grateful for his continued influence. I like having a spiritual friend. I have thought about going to work with like Roshi or another Koan teacher. I'm hesitant.
He has some Dharma successor, at least one, and I don't know if it's publicly announced, but I'm pretty sure there's somebody in Europe who has Inca from him.
Yeah.
I forget the name.
Yeah. Shoei, I think is her name. And I think he's queuing up somebody else for Dharma succession too. I'm not sure. Until these things are like set in stone, you never know. And I don't know that he's done the ceremony yet for Shoei. I'm not sure about that. Maybe he has. I think COVID made him put off the ceremony, but yeah.
I see.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to work with her. She speaks English, so maybe I don't know.
Have you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, her and Roshi stayed a couple nights at my girlfriend's house when he visited Vienna. So we spent some time together, and yeah, it was nice.
Is she a Zen practitioner? Is that how you met her?
Yeah, she was practicing, with my friend here, the priest, and so that's how I met her.
Oh, cool. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Kind of
nothing. We hit it all, man.
Could you maybe spend a few minutes how people can get in touch with you and what some touch points are for you?
Yeah, so I've got a YouTube channel now. It's Zen Confidential. So it's like very experimental. I just do these Zen videos off the cuff. You can find me at Zen Confidential. And I'm also on Patreon. So Shozan Jack Haubner at Patreon. And I've got a little community there. I've got a bunch of essays up there that I'm going to like put together for a book at some point. And a bunch of blogs, and we occasionally do Sunday sits. So there's Zen over there. So yeah, if people want to come and support me there, that'd be great.
What's the theme of your new book?
It's like post-monastery Zen, really. I've got an essay coming out in this month's summer tricycle that kind of hits on some of the themes now that I'm exploring post-monastery, post good little boy in his robes, lighting incense, doing his formal practice. I'm out in the world now, like everybody else, a lay practitioner. So it's like, how do you bring this shit into the world? That's more or less the focus of this book. And in a lot of ways, processing the end of my teacher's life and how it ended on the scandal and, on a bit of a dark note. Still processing that. That's kind of what I'm seeing over and over and over is arising in this book. This next one.
Actually, I have one last question now that I think about it. So when you were at the monastery, your practice was koans, going to sanzen or whatever, dokusan, whatever you guys called it.
And well, everything was our practice. So we had, that was part of, it was really, we did work practice, we did chanting practice, we did sitting practice.
As far as like what you're supposed to do while you're sitting, what, was ponder your koan or
No. When you're sitting, you're just when you're sitting, you're doing you're sitting. Okay. I was. So I know what you're getting at. Like you're really supposed to sit with mu when you're doing mu, right? Mm-hmm. Like I said, my teacher was really unique in the way he taught koan practice. So when we were sitting, I was taught to just do my sitting practice completely. Then when I went to him to answer the koan, give the answer completely. Yeah. There wasn't such a distinction. Like this was why he was a difficult koan teacher. It was like, it was a bit unstructured and a bit, he wasn't guiding you along. You just kind of had to go in there and explode with your answer. And, then usually he would fail you on your koan and you would leave, But sorry, I interrupted you. Ask your question.
No, that's great. And so kind of my question is like, what is your practice now? Are you kind of doing what did you call it before, your private time or?
Yeah, it actually kind of has returned to that. Yeah. And I sit with the group here, usually on Wednesdays when my friend gives a Dharma talk. I have led retreats with this group, but it's been a while. So I'm planning on doing another Zazen Kai, like a weekend retreat, maybe longer. Mostly I am sitting on my own. I got my pillow that I fold in half and I'll sit, but I'm sitting all day because I'm usually writing. So sometimes I just lie down and I do my Zazen practice, or I do walking practice outside. I check in with that zero. I dissolve into the activity that I'm doing, walking, sitting, doing the dishes. And I try and just keep checking in with sort of the core insights that I learned at the monastery to kind of keep me plumb and level throughout the day.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you can come back sometime. Maybe when you publish your book, you could come back and talk about that.
That sounds good. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ciao.